Up next, we are privileged to have with us Ravi Venkatesan, founder of GAME, Global Alliance for Mass Entrepreneurship, and chairman of the board at the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, sharing his thoughts on how to grow and scale oneself. Ravi is a business leader, social entrepreneur, and author. His two best-selling books are What the Heck Do I Do With My Life? How to Flourish in Our Turbulent Times, and Conquering the Chaos, Win in India, Win Everywhere. He has been voted as one of India's best management thinkers by Thinkers 50 and Microsoft's Alumni Hero 2020. Let's give him a warm welcome as he makes his way to the stage.
So, first of all, good afternoon. I know it's just a pre-lunch, and energies may be flagging a bit, and I'll do my best to keep it up for this 20 minutes or so. But it's fantastic to be back here at beautiful IIM in a room packed to the brim with such accomplished entrepreneurs and leaders, and so many women leaders and entrepreneurs. Now, Sanjana Govindan, who runs the 10,000 Women program, I don't know if she's even in the room, but she gave me her briefing, and she said, look, this is a really tough, very demanding set of entrepreneurs, and they want practical stuff that they can implement right away. So don't waste your time on gyan. So I listened very seriously to that brief. And so I said, look, the theme of the conference is all about growing and scaling your business. So perhaps I should talk about an important aspect of that, which is how do you grow and scale yourself? And so I'll talk for about 20 minutes in order to get you thinking, and hopefully there'll be some interest and some questions and answers and challenge after that. So, I do tend to coach a fair number of leaders, CEOs, and so forth. And one of the phrases I use quite often in these coaching sessions is, the neck of the bottle is always at the top. And I think you've all heard that. There's a less polite version of it, which is, a fish always rots from the head. And basically, these are all saying, look, quite often, the limitation to the progress, the development of an organization or a business is its leader, or the CEO, or the founder. And their limitations end up being a bottleneck or a challenge for the business, for the enterprise. And certainly, I know this is true from personal experience, because from time to time, I have felt I have been the bottleneck to the organization. And so it's important for us in that moment to recognize you're there and learn to get out of your own way and to continue to grow and scale yourself so that you don't become that barrier. So in that vein, I thought I'll talk about 5 or 6 ideas that have been incredibly helpful to me in this journey. And the first thing, by the way, these are my notes. The first idea I want to talk about is mindset. And I think all of you know what mindset means, but it's basically the assumptions, the stories, the beliefs we carry in our head, mostly in the subconscious mind. And these beliefs and stories are very powerful because it's sort of like the software that runs your life. These beliefs and stories determine everything about our life, how we manifest in the world, how we engage with other people, what we strive for and accomplish, how happy we are or not. All these things are determined not by exogenous factors, but by the mindset. And so this becomes very important if you're an entrepreneur like most of you are, or indeed for any one of us. And there are wonderful, wonderful quotes which have been, so first of all, this is not a unique or new observation. Many people have commented on this, written about this, talked about this. So for instance, Bill Gates famously said, what you believe is what you achieve, okay? That's it. So your beliefs determine much of what you actually accomplish. Even he was not novel. 100 years before him, Henry Ford said, whether you believe you can or whether you believe you cannot, you're right. Okay? So think about that. Then there was a very wonderful teacher and speaker called Wayne Dyer. So he said, look, nothing in the world is as it is. Everything is as we are. And so if you change the way we see things, the things we see change. So this is really, really important. So you need to be able to understand What are your implicit beliefs and assumptions? Are they serving you well, or are they holding you back? And if they're holding you back, we need to be able to challenge and change those beliefs in a constructive fashion. And that unlocks a lot of potential. Now, there are two particular sets of beliefs which are very important. The first is beliefs about ourselves, which is, am I good? Am I capable of this or not? Right? Am I deserving of love? Am I successful? These stories we tell ourselves, which are very deep, and we don't even confide in others, are very powerful. And they tend to be the most powerful of the limiting beliefs. So it's quite important to unpack those. The other set of beliefs have to do with how we define success and how do we define failure and what is success, because that's what we end up striving for. What are you trying to build out there, right? You have an implicit idea of success, and you're working in that direction. And so being very clear about what success means to you becomes quite important. So mindset is one thing that you should work on. The second one is team. There's one thing I've learned in nearly 40 years of building organizations of different sorts. It is rarely are we constrained by opportunity or even resources. Mostly we're constrained by the team we build around ourselves and the cultural context in which that team is working. That is going to determine how far you go with your enterprise. Now, most entrepreneurs I know, CEOs as well, of established businesses, we're not very intentional about this team building. Because why? Because you're really, really, really busy already, right? You have to raise money, you have to build and ship product or service or whatever, acquire customers, deal with crises, then there'll be some tax demand, there's some regulatory change. You're constantly juggling balls, solving problems. In between all this, you have to somehow build a team. So team building becomes just one more activity in a long list of activities. However, the most successful leaders I've seen are incredibly intentional about how they build teams and how they shape culture. And towards the latter part of my career, I began to become more intentional about this, although I've made my fair share of mistakes. So what are 3 important ideas when it comes to building teams? The first one is you build a team around you. You are the center or the anchor of that team. And so, Narayan Murthy used to have a phrase. He used to say, the team needs to be mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. Those of you who studied set theory will immediately recognize where this comes from. But basically, each person on the team needs to bring some unique capabilities, and together you are whole. None of us are whole on our own. So the team building starts with yourself, self-awareness. So I know, for instance, I'm quite good at creative things. I'm good at conceptual things, strategy, thinking deeply about problems. I'm not very good at operations and execution. I'm not very good at sales, okay? So what? But these are enormously important, as you know. So always I start with hiring somebody who's excellent at that, so that together we're complete. And it's not just about capabilities, it's also about personality. I'm actually an introvert. I do my best work one-on-one or brainstorming, problem solving in small teams. But if you're running an organization, you have to go out there, you have to engage the people on the front line, you have to celebrate successes, cheerlead, light the Diwali lamp, go out there all across the country, meeting customers, partners. It's a very extroverted activity. But I'm not very good at that. I do it, but the barest minimum possible, frankly. So what? So you always hire on the team somebody who's, not one, multiple people whose personalities are very outgoing and celebratory. So in this way, you assemble intentionally a team. And if you do this well, you're hiring people not smaller than, shorter than you, but people who are every bit as good as you and better at some things than you are. okay? And that's how you do it. The second important idea is you don't want a team of stars, but you want a star team. There's a huge difference, okay? So it's not a bunch of excellent prima donnas, but a set of pretty reasonable people who work well together to achieve extraordinary things. And the difference between a team of stars and a star team is culture. What is the culture in the organization, particularly culture at the top team? And this culture, as you know, Peter Drucker, some 40 years ago, said it eats strategy for breakfast, and I had to learn that the hard way. Even quite recently in one of the organizations that I lead, we had to do a complete reboot, or reset the organization and rebuild it from scratch because the culture had gone wrong, and that was constraining what we were able to achieve. So what is culture? Culture is nothing but the implicit rules, not what's written on the wall, on the poster, but the implicit rules of what behaviors are acceptable, what behaviors are not acceptable, what gets rewarded around here, and what gets punished around here. And so you want to be as explicit about these rules as possible and make sure that you're living those rules. So I, for instance, in every one of the organizations where I'm in some sort of a leadership role, I have 4 or 5 rules. So one is, for instance, disagree without becoming disagreeable. So I had this wrong impression that good teams are harmonious. In fact, they're not. High-performing teams tend to squabble and fight a lot, but they do that constructively without it becoming personal, okay? So you need to create an environment where disagreement on ideas is actually a good thing, but not expressed in a dysfunctional manner. A second very important quality or cultural value which I've learned is that you can advocate as much as you want for your idea, but once we've decided and made a decision, you need to fall in line. You can't continue to be an advocate for your idea and be dysfunctional. And I've seen so many of our teams which just keep reopening the decision. I don't know if you have it in your organization, but it's a pathology. A third one is what? We tend to, in particularly in intense working environments, we tend to sort of make assumptions about each other, okay? Assumptions about intent, assumptions about competence, etc. And so what you want to do is encourage people to not make these assumptions, but have a conversation. Give benefit of doubt and say, look, this is how I'm feeling, and I'm uncomfortable. Can we talk about it and clarify rather than leap to conclusions? Because when you leap to conclusions, it becomes very corrosive. Distrust sets in. So whatever it is, you need to think about 4 or 5 of these rules which are just really, really important. So that's it about teams. The third thing I want to talk about in terms of growing and scaling yourself is build your support networks. Look, first of all, the world is becoming crazier and more dysfunctional, complex, volatile. You've heard the term VUCA, and it's going to become more so. In addition, you're on a very, very interesting but very challenging journey, which will have lots of little potholes and bumps and an occasional existential crisis. And so what you want to do is make sure that you have good support networks in place before you hit the pothole, not try and figure out after the fact. And I'm talking about particularly 3 support networks. The first and foremost is most obvious, which is your spouse, your closest family, and your closest friends. You better have some close friends, okay, who are going to be there by you when the chips are down. COVID was a good time because nothing worked. And the only thing that was out there at that time were our neighbors and closest friends and family. And at that time, you realized whether you were alone or you actually had a good support system. So make sure you have that. The second one, which is incredibly important related to this, is the idea of a personal board. I encourage everybody to develop, like a company has a board of directors, think about a set of people who are your personal board. So when you make decisions that involve you, you have some good advice and in that process, right? So what do you do? So through life, as you go through it, you think about people whose wisdom or judgment or perspective you really appreciate. And you say, you know, I wish when I take this decision I have access to that. And slowly you put together a list of names of people who really, really you admire and respect and trust, whose judgment you trust. And so I, for instance, will not make any consequential decision in my personal life or professional life without consulting a few of these people. So when I was looking to leave my first job after 15 years to go run Microsoft, on one hand I was excited, but the other hand I was terrified. So I consulted my personal board. 10 out of 10 said, don't do it. I disregarded them, but I at least walked in with my eyes open. Okay? So same thing with you. Should I leave my job and start a business? Oh, I'm no longer getting joy. I want to step back as a CEO and founder and just, is this the right time? Or what's the best way? You want a set of people whose advice you can take in clarifying your own thoughts. And the third one is your real board of directors. I have seen so many significant entrepreneurs who approach the idea of a board from a compliance perspective. Okay, that you need it for the ROC or whatever, or just before IPO, they'll come to me and say, Ravi, would you join my board because they want some important person on the board or something? Just tick the box. I think you're missing something incredibly valuable. A good board, and whether it's a statutory board or an advisory board, is just worth its weight in gold. And I found that out when I was very young. So when I was 28 or so, I got the opportunity. I was thrust into the CEO role of a very large and very challenged organization. And I was in over my head. But luckily for me, there was a board. And on that board were 3 or 4 really good people. And we were able to achieve what we did largely because of the good advice and support I got. A few years later, I was the chair and CEO of a very large public company. And again, we were going through a challenging period of time. So I said, look, I need to change my board and get some really good people on it. So I went out and got this is now 99 or so, I got Venu Srinivasan on it. I got Rajiv Bakshi, was running Pepsi at that time. I got Rama Bijapurkar, and so on. And again, it was invaluable. So don't wait. Think wherever you are in your journey, whether it's fairly early stage or whether you're now at a point where your hockey stick is kicking in, it doesn't matter. You will be well served by having 4 or 5 people who are competent, bring different perspectives, and who really care about you and your success. So put this board together would be my advice. Number 4. Number 4 is all about learning, but it's not about learning new technical skills, which you all know about, but learning agility. Most people know by now that, look, things are changing really fast, AI is kicking in, so and we're going to live longer, so we better refresh our knowledge base all the time. So by all means, go read widely or take online courses. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is learning agility, which is the ability to adapt to situations which you have never, ever experienced. The world is becoming crazier and crazier, and we're all going to find ourselves suddenly in situations which we couldn't imagine. Half of America can't imagine the next 4 years, okay? So, but we're all going to go through these things. So how do you learn to adapt and thrive no matter what the circumstances? And for that, what you need to do is go through what I write in my book about crucible experiences. So when you look at your own life, and whether it's fairly short or whether, like me, it's a relatively longer one, you look back at your life and you will see moments when you were thrown into a big challenge. And in the act of becoming successful, overcoming that challenge, you grew. You grew in your self-confidence, you grew in your leadership skills, you grew in your character, particularly tenacity, you picked up other things. So what you want to do is not wait for life to kick you in the rear end, but rather every few years, push yourself, take on some big challenge that puts you outside your comfort zone. And in that process, that becomes the crucible in which you develop all these qualities that I talked about. So if I look back at my career, almost every 5 or 10 years, probably more intentionally than by accident, I've walked away from things to take on a completely new challenge. And then you spend the next 5, 7, 8 years making that successful. And so it's your own entrepreneurial venture is a perfect example of a crucible experience. But then keep pushing the boundaries, okay? It's very easy to get satisfied at some point. So crucible experience is important. I'm getting close to the end. 2 points I wanted to make are the inner game of leadership. So look, this is all about leadership. And all of us know that there is an outer game because that's the one we play. And the outer game is all about using your skills, your knowledge, your expertise, your networks to solve problems and accomplish things. And most of you in this room are already quite good at it. You're going to get better with practice. But there is a more important inner game of leadership. And the inner game of leadership is about things like self-awareness, managing yourself, learning to moderate and control your own emotions, your thoughts, your beliefs, all these things. And because if you can't manage yourself and your thoughts and your emotions, it's going to get much harder to manage teams and the business and so forth. So the more you're in control of yourself, the more likely you're able to manage situations. So this inner game requires practice. The problem is very few of us are actually intentional about the inner game. Again, why? Because the outer game itself is overwhelming. So you need to create time on a regular basis, week after week, to sharpen your inner game. And there are 4 tools of that inner game. One is reflection. A second one is coaching. A third tool is meditation. And a fourth one is therapy. And I constantly use all 4 of these tools to continuously improve that inner game. Okay? So again, I'm being very provocative and deliberate, so in the Q&A we can actually talk about some of these things. So work on that inner game. The final point I want to talk about is luck. Luck is just hugely important, right? And a lot of successful people like to pretend, and they'll be on YouTube or LinkedIn saying, it's all my hard work and efforts and good decisions I made and so forth. Of course, those are important. But having seen so much of life, I think that's a small part of it. The bigger factor is whatever we call it, luck, grace. Even Napoleon, he says, look, I'd rather have a lucky general than a great general. Okay? So the question becomes, how do you improve your luck? Is it purely random, or are there ways of improving it? So I've written and talked about it elsewhere, but for this audience, I'd say there are 2 practices which I think are incredibly important, or at least incredibly useful. One is the practice of gratitude. So for now, more than 25 years, the first thing in the morning, eyes are not yet open, but your mind is waking up, I'd make 2 lists. I count 10 things that I'm grateful for. Grateful for the fact that I'm alive. I have my health. I have my family. I'm not on the road. I live in a country which is, reasonably stable. It could be in Gaza or whatever. So you can make some 10 to 12 things before you get impatient. And then I make a list of at least 10 things that could happen to me but haven't happened to me, right? You could get some dreadful disease. Your house could burn down. You could be in an accident and have a limb amputated, whatever. All kinds of horrible things can happen, but they don't happen. And that is grace. So I make it a point, first thing in the morning, last thing at night, to just spend 5 minutes doing this. And it keeps you humble. The second thing is paying forward. Look, we're all here because of others. Okay, like Isaac Newton said, if I've seen farther than others, it's because I stood on the shoulders of giants. And the giants whose shoulders we stand on include parents, teachers, managers, mentors, investors, whatever, farmers, bees, all kinds of things. And there's no way we can go back and thank them. But the one thing you can do is pay forward, which means every opportunity there is to help someone, help them. For instance, you're all successful, soon to be more successful women entrepreneurs, and you know that journey is hard. It's hard for any entrepreneur. It's harder if you're a woman. What are you doing to pay forward and support, encourage, mentor other young women behind you? So anyway, these two practices can ensure you keep the flywheel of good luck flowing in your life. I'll stop here because there's not much time and I want to make sure there's a little bit of discussion time. My whole idea was just to provoke thought. Okay, thank you. How are we going to do this? Should I just take questions or? Okay. We'll take 2-3 questions, or you can challenge as well. What is therapy? Therapy is going and seeing a counselor. Sorry? She's trying to get me a. No, I'm talking about what we all understand by the word therapy. Go see a psychologist, counselor, psychiatrist to get help. And in India, like in many societies, there's some stigma because to going out and getting help. I think almost everybody I know can use some help. And no, there's nothing. So for instance, and I'll be public about it, I was on this treadmill of achieving. And how much ever I achieved, I was never satisfied. I didn't feel successful. So you have to climb a bigger mountain. And I got, you turn 55 and you say, what is this? I can't sustain this. So when you go get help, you realize, this is some deep childhood stuff. I had a mother, mothers are very powerful, who was quite influential in my life, and she lived out her life through me, which happens very often. So I had to achieve more and more. It was never good enough to be second in class. It was never good enough to go to so-and-so college. And she died 20 years ago, but I'm living out the tape. Okay? Now, how do you cure yourself of that? This is where things like this can be very, very helpful. Yeah. So are there other questions?
Yes, sir. I'm Divya.
Sorry, go ahead. Let's take 2-3 at a time. Yeah.
Yes. So thank you. I thought they were powerful insights. So thank you so much for that. I constantly reflect. And I find that sometimes you tend to spiral. And also sometimes at various, when you're maybe, like you said, the proverbial pothole in the entrepreneurial journey, it becomes very difficult to identify the top 2 things you need to actually work on. So any thoughts on that? So how do you identify that when you're in that pothole?
Okay, good. As I said, in the interest of time, I want to get a few questions and I'll do my best to aggregate.
So I have a question here.
Where's that?
Here. On this side. Here. So I have a question. You spoke about the personal board. Now, a lot of times, it's experienced that it's good to, definitely I come from a space where we train directors to be on boards. Yeah. Now, when we talk of personal board, and it's a lot of times, seen that you ask for some feedback from a lot of people and you get different opinions and judgments. So how at that time, because everyone speaks about different idea and practically in my experience, I've seen, when you follow one idea, somebody says, oh, not like that, you should have done like that. Yeah. So I think, some thoughts on when you gather a lot of ideas, how do you actually evaluate them and judge? So that's one question from my side.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Excellent.
Yeah, I have a question, sir. My name is Rajnikant. Thank you. I'm a startup founder of a company which provides employment for special people, which includes persons with disabilities, senior citizens, and women. The question to you is, are we paying a cost for being successful? Do we pay a price for being successful? Because once you focus on family, then from the career point of view, you pay the price of not being super successful, or is it either way? If you focus on the career, then the family pays the price. So is it possible to strike a right balance to pay the right price?
three rich questions. Let me get, my memory is not what it used to be, so let me try and answer that. So one is, in any situation, how do you figure out what is the most important one or two things that you should work on? Look, quite fairly, that's what's called common sense. If you're just able to step back a bit and look at the situation, 80% of the time, it's blindingly obvious what you need to do, okay? But if it's not, then ask a few people. Usually your teams are much smarter about these things than you yourself are. They can tell you. If you have a board, they will have an observation. But it's not rocket science, it's incredibly simple. I took on in 2015, the role of chairman of Bank of Baroda, and it was the first experiment to put a private sector non-banker in charge of a public sector bank. And Raghu Rajan called me and said, will you do this? And I said, Raghu, I don't know anything about banking or public sector. He said, well, will you do worse than those who created the mess? So I said, okay, fine, good point, I'll go in. And you spend a few months in there and it becomes extremely obvious what's the problem out here and what you need to do. So I came up with a sheet of paper. We didn't have McKinsey or whatever. One is, 4 or 5 things we need to do in the next 3 years. And that's what you just relentlessly execute on. So I don't think what is the problem if you stop being delusional. The problem is you get delusional, okay? So, for instance, you're in a startup particularly, you can get delusional quite often. That, look, if I just stay longer down this path, there's going to be some miracle that happens and customers are going to show up and pay more, okay? And it's not going to happen. So I've done multiple startups, particularly in the social sector. And, I got one of these organizations and we were trying to raise funding. And I was out there pitching, and everybody was polite to me. But there was no big money coming. It becomes obvious. Well, the problem was we were trying to do too many things. It was too complicated. People didn't understand it. And without anybody saying so, it became, after 5 conversations, quite obvious. You need to do 2 things, not 10 things. Okay? So, any case, I think if most of the time it's obvious, and if not, the people around you, if you're really willing to ask, will tell you. This issue of personal board where people give you multiple perspectives, how do you figure it out? I think that's a good question. So again, I'll give you personal examples. One was that old story when I was in 2003. I wanted to go to, I had turned 40. Something happens when you turn 40, you feel like life is slipping away and you need to do something meaningful. And at that time, I had this opportunity to run Microsoft, but I was terrified. So my personal board included, well, of course, my spouse, people like Nandan Nilekani, and a few others. And what was in this case, there was no disagreement amongst them. 10 out of 10 said, this is the worst idea you've ever had, don't do it, because you'll get fired. Okay? And then I asked myself, this is good advice, I understand the risk now. But when I turn 50, which will I feel worse about? That I had this chance and I turned it down out of fear, or I took it and got fired 2 years later. I said, let me take the chance, but let me view it as a project, not a career. Okay? So that's the value of these perspectives. Each one is a mirror that reflects some aspect. And then you say, look, let me examine that and see what fits. And then at least you walk in with your eyes open. I think that's the main thing. On this issue of essentially work-life balance, trade-offs, I'm not a good person to ask because I have not lived a very, very balanced life. Okay? But I do think it is largely delusional to think about you can have it all. Okay? Some people appear from a distance, but we don't know until you're actually inside the tent. What is the price you've paid? From outside, it looks like they've done it all. but I don't think so. From personal experience, I think there are consequences, but I choose to live a life which is not balanced, but where by and large there'll be no regret. Okay, so today if my time is up, I won't feel too bad generally about the choices I've made. So what do? I'm very intense. So one thing from a professional standpoint is if you do what you love and love what you do, then it doesn't feel like such a trade-off. Okay, when you're doing something you really don't like just to make money is when it feels onerous. So I think all of you are hopefully on a journey which you choose to be on. So that's a good thing. The second aspect is about work-life integration, which is, nowadays especially, I try and include my wife Sonali, who was a professional CEO till she retired last year, in as many of my trips and so forth, okay? And I involve her in discussing my work. So you integrate those pieces. You try to make sure that you are doing things you enjoy besides work. So I love dogs, particularly streeties, so I spend lots of time with strays and so on and so forth. You just do your best, but it's not perfect. It's never a pretty picture. You do drop some balls, and that's okay. But the main point is that, look, live life in a way that you don't have too many regrets. The worst thing is you turn 85, and then you look back and said, wish I could turn the clock back. And you don't want to be there. I think I'm outstaying my welcome, but
One more question, sir.
Oh, okay, good. Who's that?
I'm Dr. Ashna. How do you set boundaries to protect your time, energy, and focus while still pushing for growth?
Good question. Any other? Yes, two more and then I'll wrap it up.
Women here, so I thought it would be relevant to ask this. Do you see your mother's push for excellence as something to be grateful for, or something that left you with challenges you would want to work through in therapy?
Yeah.
Or maybe a bit of both?
Okay.
Yeah. So, as entrepreneurs, when we start off, we teach our teams everything. We become like their parents, and they look up to us for every little thing, every little decision. But later on, you want them to do things on their own. You start wanting them to make decisions on their own, but still they
Okay. And third thing is you better get good at saying no. Okay. And most of us are nice, and it's very easy. The default is yes. And so you end up wasting a bunch of time, whatever. So on the question of how do you build an advisory board? Part of it is you're feeling your way. So I think it's a good idea to start. I missed one question. No, I did the boundaries one. Team. Yeah, look. Are you a mother? Okay, well, isn't it the same with your child? In the beginning, the child, I think you keep telling the child what to do, what not to do, and therefore the child keeps looking up to you. You have to encourage the child to grow into an adult. So with these individuals, you say, no, what decision would you make? The problem is they don't trust that you won't scold them if they make a mistake. That's the problem. Okay? They just don't trust that if they make a decision that's different from you or it doesn't work out, there won't be consequences, which is why they put the monkey on your back. If you refuse to take the monkey and give it right back to them, it's very, very quick, or else you know that you don't have the right person, you hire their boss. Okay? Anyway, I think I don't know who's managing time because, okay, I'm getting very clear signals. I'll stay on afterwards, okay? So thank you. Good luck to all of you.